both my parents, I don't think neither one of them really wanted children. They didn't have good parents themselves. So they really didn't know how to parent or, never asked for help. Back then, they didn't really do any of that stuff. Never got counseling, anything like that. And when I was 21, I took something called the Landmark Forum and learned that there's, things that happen to us. And then there's the things that we interpret the story that we put with it, right? And that we have these expectations towards the people in our lives, and they're just showing up the best version of them and not really knowing that you need them or want them to be different. And so when I learned that at 21, it was like, wow. So my parents only knew what they knew, and they were just doing the best they could.
Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It is my pleasure to have Sha Sparks with us. Shay is the CEO or Chief Excitement Officer of Sparks of Fire International. She hosts the Power of Investing in People podcast, and she is the author of How to Get Your Voice Back. Shay is also a certified fearless living coach and trainer and the co-founder of the Fire Starters Book Project. She's an energetic catalyst, a fearless communicator, and she sparks leaders who are in transition, who are unclear to go from fear to fired up in their life and business. Shay, it's so great to have you on the show.
Well, I'm honored, Stephan, to be here. It was just so amazing conversation that we had when we met at PodFest. And I can't believe it's that much time later that we finally get to sit down and have this together. So thank you for having me.
You are quite welcome. It is such a pleasure, and I'm glad that we pulled this together. And this episode won't actually air for about 6 months from now, so that will be ancient history.
Right.
We're talking about PodFest January of 2023, and wow, this episode is airing in 2024. So I was so inspired and excited by your story that you shared when we sat down. It was with Seth, who has a great podcast and business focused on channeling angels, and he's just a great guy. I met him at a previous PodFest, I think a year ago before that. And you shared, I think with both of us, this story of being about 8 years old and having a vision. And I'd love for us to just start off with that, because that was so memorable. That at that moment when I heard that story, I'm like, I got to have her on my podcast.
Well, thank you for remembering that, because sometimes, I have so many stories that I share that it's hard to tell which one makes an impact. So between the ages of, I will say 8 to 10, and probably more on the 8 years old realm, I was attending Sunday school at church that I had been going to for most of my life. It was a non-denominational church, but a very traditional type of church. It wasn't Catholic, but, had a lot of pomp and circumstance, tradition, stuff like that, along with going to church. And I was in the church basement where Sunday school was held, and I'm staring at this corkboard looking thing that was blank. It didn't have anything hanging on it, but it was also used as a room divider. Not that that makes any difference, but to get your visual sense about it, I'm just staring at it, and I'm looking up to the right at the ceiling. So you can kind of see the ceiling tiles and this corkboard. And for whatever, I don't even know how to explain how it happened, other than a movie flashed in front of my eyes. Now I understand it being a vision, but I was standing on stage with a microphone in my hand, and I am speaking to what looked like many, many people, and they were laughing and excited and smiling and all really happy to be there. And I was like, I don't know what that means, but okay. And then around the same time of life, of age frame, another profound experience happened, which I don't know if I shared this with you, but I'll add it because it pertains to it. We were learning, again, it's a Christian church. I was learning the Easter story, and I'm in the back row of Sunday school, and we had metal folding chairs. And I was sitting in the back row because even at that age, I was a troublemaker. So that's where I sat. And there was this voice, presence, entity that came and sat next to me on the folding chair next to me and leaned into me. So I could feel the presence of something, leaned into me, into my right ear, and whispered, "Did you hear that? The religious people killed Jesus. So be like Jesus and love everyone." And spiritual was the word that I took away from that moment. And that was all that was said. But in my mind, my confidence was not there. My self-worth was not there. So I had this, I wonder if that's it. And then immediately my fear took over and was, well, there's no way I could do that. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not courageous enough. I'm not confident enough to be him, nor do I want to be him. So it was kind of like, oh yeah, that's not it at all. So around that same time frame, we were watching Tony Robbins. There was this other woman that was on Oprah, and she was talking about this TV show that she had called Starting Over. And it was where she had a house full of women that she was coaching. And some of the coaching exercises and things that she was showing was how women had experienced some sort of trauma, and she was helping them release it to move forward, to be able to get out of it. And my mom looked at me and said, "I think you could do that." And I don't remember if her and I had talked about that vision of the public speaking, but I just think, and especially now that she's gone, I'm like, that is so, I love how that, I believe that was the only time in my life that she actually spoke life into me. She was not a very nurturing or I will say she cared in her best way, and not the way that, most kids need to be cared for, but, and nurtured, but she did her best. It's fascinating because then jump ahead many years later, I'm at a conference to clarify my website in Nashville. And I'm after the first day, I'm like, man, I'm talking to some people I'd met. And I was like, man, I don't know about you guys, but I'm like stuck. And they're like, oh, you should talk to the other life coach in the room. And I'm like, oh, really? Who's that? And they're like, Rhonda Britton. And I was like, Rhonda Britton, why do I know that name? And I'm like, flipping the files in my head, right? The Google in my head going, where did that come from? So I get back to my hotel that night and I Google it, and, I see that she had Starting Over and that she'd been on Oprah. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's it. Then and funny story, the memory of my mom didn't come up until way later. But, so I talked to her the next day. She's like, oh, I have this, I said, yeah, I would love to talk to you. She's like, yeah, let's sit at lunch. So we go to lunch, and she says, well, tell me about your coaching certification. Who did you go through to get certified? And I said, oh, I didn't get certified. She goes, oh. And I said, do you think I should be certified? She's like, well, of course I do. I have my own certification program. And I said, oh, well, tell me, what it's about. And she's like, well, I help people step out of their comfort zone. And I was like, well, this is clearly meant to be, because at the time I had called myself a practitioner of stepping out of my comfort zone. I had lots of practice of doing that. And she said, and I help people, break through fear. And I was like, oh, well, I experienced lots of fear in my life, so I get that. And she said, if you want to know more, there is a fearless conversation workshop coming up in January. And I was like, well, that's funny. I'm calling myself a communication coach. So clearly everything is aligning. So I just need to go and find out. And so that was in November. And when I met her, and then in that following January, I was out in LA at this fearless conversation workshop. And sitting there within just a few hours, I felt like I was in a hug, sitting in this hotel room, in this conference room. And I had never experienced that before. And so immediately at the first break, I'm in the back of the room. I'm like, what is this fearless communication certification look like? And how much is it? How long does it take? Like all the things. And at the time I was like, and my dad is sick. So, am I able to pause if I need to take care of him? All the things, all the questions. And, I was literally sold by the first break to sign up to then become a certified fearless living coach, which I did right then and there. And that's been, gosh, probably 6 years ago now.
January, 6 years ago. And something you probably don't remember this, but I'll remind you. When we met, you mentioned Rhonda Britton. You remember? And I was like, really? Funny coincidence. Guess who I interviewed not even 2 weeks ago?
That's right. I do remember that. Yes.
Yes. And I just checked my calendar, and guess which date that was?
January of.
Yeah.
No.
1/11.
Wow.
That's, I think, the third time today I got 111.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. So much alignment. I mean,
oh yeah.
So
Speaking
much
of alignment, so
yes.
our listeners not aware of this, but we had a little technical snafu, and false alarm. Thankfully, the error message saying that it didn't record the the recording was a false alarm, so it's all good. But funny thing that happened because of that is we were going to go over time, and then that was going to be a problem for your appointment at top of the hour from now. So we were going to have to either cut it short or I don't know, something. And then you just got a text message or some sort of communication that call had canceled. And I'm like,
yeah,
wow, you are a powerful manifester. Thank you for clearing your schedule. And that got us on this whole rabbit hole of around human design. Do you want to share a little bit about that? Because that was spookily accurate what I just happened to say out of the ether about being a powerful manifester.
Yeah. So for your audience, if you know anything about human design, just know I am not an expert. I don't know much about it. So feel free to message me and talk about share more what you have, what you know. So there was several years ago, a friend of mine said, oh, you got to find this app. It's called Human Design. And it's kind of similar to a natal chart. And it takes, your date and birth date and time and where you were born and puts it into this thing. And then kind of like a personality, like Myers-Briggs, it tells you what you are. And I know there's manifester and there's manifester generator. And I think there's generator and some other things that I really honestly don't know anything about. I know I showed up as a manifester. And when I saw it, I laughed because I'm thinking, man, actually, that's pretty true. And the more I now say it to myself, like, oh yeah, I'm totally a manifester, the more stuff manifests.
Yeah, and you called yourself a magical manifester.
Magical manifester, yes, because several years ago, actually, when I was at this coaching retreat with Rhonda Britton, there was several of us who have become really close-knit friends. And one of them is a shaman. So we did a shamanic journey as we were getting ready to prepare for our retreat. And one of the things that you do is you really call in your spirit guides. And it's a beautiful story, and we could go into that if you want, or we can just cut to the chase. And
No, I want to go into it.
Okay. So she has a drum there, and she's drumming this beautiful beat, and she takes you through a guided meditation, and she tells you things like, okay, so I want you to picture your happy place. And I'm in my head like, oh, immediately I know my happy place. It is on the top of, in Estes Park, looking over, seeing this gorgeous mountain view. And all of a sudden it was like, yeah, that wasn't showing up. And I was like, okay, what is the deal? What is the deal? What is the deal? And all of a sudden a beach showed up. And I was like, okay, got it. I'm trying to control this. Okay. And so she's like, yeah. And there might be, these beautiful flowers, or there might be a waterfall, or there might be, and she started to name all these other things that is in your environment, right? And in my head, I remember consciously thinking, oh, there's no such thing as flowers or a waterfall on a beach. Why would she say something like that? And then boom, there they show up in my head, in my unconscious, right? In this vision, imagination vision. And I'm like, oh, that's funny. And there they are. She says, yeah. And so then she goes into, you're going to be visited by your spirit guides, and just allow them to show up. It could be a person. You could have several. You could have, one, you could have two, you could have, 5, 6, 10. But just trust the process that they're going to show up exactly how they're going to show up. And I'm like, trust the process. Well, clearly in my head, clearly I'm not trusting the process. I'm trying to control this. So who's going to show up? And the first thing that showed up was a crane, a bird that's a crane, beautiful white crane. The next thing that showed up was a centaur, and which is really, for most people, very odd, but for whatever reason, it was a centaur. And then it was a fairy, which I thought was really interesting, like almost like a Tinkerbell kind of a thing, but it was a fairy. Their fourth one was an angel. And then a fifth one was my dad. And so, and they had both passed at this time, my mom and my dad, and both my parents. And so it was really fascinating. Like, this is what was showing up. And then we would come out of that shamanic journey and then go back in. And then the next time we went back in, it was each one have a message for you. The centaur, I remember him saying to me that you are a bridge. It seems like you're two different people, but really in two different places, but really you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And you're exactly bringing everything together that you're supposed to be bringing together, which is very true in many ways. And at the time I was living in Washington, D.C. and Kansas City. So it literally looked like I was literally in two places at the same time, or not at the same time, but living in two places. And then this fairy, it comes to me and says, so you are a magical manifester. And I went, ooh, okay, magical manifester. And it's just been over the past several years that I've really been like owning that of, okay, what does magical manifester looking like? And just playing with it rather than being so like serious about it and figuring it out and owning it and all that stuff. Just being like, oh, kind of playing with it, being like, oh, I'm curious. What magic am I going to manifest today? Right? Kind of a thing. And so that's been really fun to watch unfold. Then I'll share with you, the angel actually was my mom. And it wasn't until we went at this retreat, we were in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and there's a church there that the story goes that it was a Catholic church and the nuns were running it. And there's a magical staircase that they call it in this church that was made by a carpenter who just showed up. The nuns were praying, and all of a sudden this carpenter showed up and wanted this place to stay. And he's like, how can I pay you? And they said, well, we have this beautiful loft and we don't have a way to get there. And so he created this spiral staircase that has no support system whatsoever. And the wood is curved, and it's just gorgeous. But there's a normal spiral staircase has this, like beam of support in the middle, and there is no beam of support. And so they've called it like this miracle magic staircase type of thing. And so we went there, and it was just, I mean, you feel the energy of something, absolutely something. And so then I go to the gift shop, and, I'm a sucker for a little trinket of something, a souvenir, right? Like, oh, what do I take? And this is the first time I've ever done this in a gift shop. And I think I need to do this at all times now. So I go in there and I just stand there and I just close my eyes and I get really present, and I'm just, talking to God. And I said, okay. And I'm looking in one direction, by the way. I'm looking, and straight ahead. And I said, okay, God, what do you want me? What is it that you want me to learn? What do you want me to buy and take home? And what does it represent? And I wake up, and I'm now shifted my entire body and my head to look to the left. which was weird because I don't recall moving. I don't recall moving. I don't recall anything. And so I opened my eyes, and immediately straight ahead is this metal angel that is made out of like metal, different kinds of metal. Copper is one of them. And then it has like chakra beads around it with all the colors of the chakra. And it's got this like wire frame around it. And I'm like, okay, that's it. And I'm like, okay, God, what does that represent? Your mom. Like, got it. So my mom is that angel that visited, and my mom believed in angels. And gosh, we could talk about so many conversations her and I used to have around angels that we started because of watching Oprah, and somebody on there was talking about angels, and we immediately knew we were surrounded by angels a lot. My dad in this shamanic journey showed up, which is really quite funny, is that his message for me was that my husband was on his way to be patient. And so, I'm still waiting. So if he shows up, I've been patient, Dad. I'll let you know that.
That's awesome. And so, do you feel like your mom, like you're good with your mom having, all the problem behaviors and things from your childhood? Do you feel like that was all perfect, or do you feel like that was just really hard and uncomfortable and painful, and you wished it would have gone better? But it is what it is. Like when you look back at your childhood, how does that feel for you?
Both actually, and all of it, right? I feel all of it. So both my parents, I don't think neither one of them really wanted children. I'm the last. I have two older brothers. They didn't have good parents themselves. So they really didn't know how to parent, or, never asked for help, never really talked about it, never read books. Back then they didn't really do any of that stuff. Never got counseling, anything like that. My dad didn't know how to be a husband. He didn't know how to be a father. My mom didn't know how to be a nurturing, loving, and neither was her mom. My grandma wasn't either. And when I was 21, I took something called the Landmark Forum and learned that there's, things that happen to us. And then there's the things that we interpret, the story that we put with it, right? And that we have these expectations towards the people in our lives, and they're just showing up the best version of them and not really knowing that you need them or want them to be different. And so when I learned that at 21, it was like, wow. So my parents only knew what they knew. They didn't really know what they didn't know. Think about what they didn't know. Get help for what they didn't know. And they were just doing the best they could. Got it. Okay. So in a way, I think I started the forgiveness process, is what I'll say, in that age at 21. And I was in an abusive relationship for 12 years. And when I got out of that, I was really able to say, one, I was in that relationship for a reason, was to really heal me. But in the process of healing me, I was able to have conversations with my parents then and say stuff like, and they're divorced by this time, and say things like, oh, are you trying to manipulate me, or are you asking me to do something? And my dad was like, what? Like, I don't even know what that means. And I said, well, this is what it means, is that you're demanding that I do something. And if I don't do it, that you're going to be upset with me. And then you're going to, quote unquote, beat me up verbally, emotionally, mentally, withhold love if I don't do it. And that's exactly what my ex used to do. So that's why I was with someone like that, because it's familiar. And I would say it in that kind of tone rather than like blaming or shaming or guilting them into, that they were bad parents and that's why I was in an abusive relationship. And just being able to have that open conversation, they started to have self-awareness. They started to learn about themselves, and they started to heal. My mom was super sarcastic, and I learned that sarcasm is really anger in a clown suit. And so, once I used to share that with her, I'm like, okay, Mom, you're telling me this about my brother, but you're really angry at him. So you're wrapping it in trying to be funny, but it's not funny. You're really angry. And what are you getting by you telling me about it? Do you want me to go fix it or go talk to him? Because I can't. The only one who can is you. So I'm going to hand it back to you and say, what would happen if you would go and go talk to him about that rather than be upset about it? And she's like, what? I'm not angry. You're angry. And I'm like, no, no, I'm not angry, Mom. I'm really okay. And just the transformation in my parents was just mind blowing to watch them really understand who they were, right? And how they were being. And so then I would, at the time, I was a hairstylist. And so I'm sharing all of these stories with my clients. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what, you're never going to believe what I learned about myself this week, that I'm emotionally unavailable. And they're like, oh, what? And I'm like, yeah, I'm not able to really say what I mean and mean what I say. I use sarcasm and I am, really trying to manipulate people into doing what I need them to do rather than just asking them. And they're like, whoa, I do that too. And I'm like, really? And they're like, yeah, I didn't even notice until you said something. And so they're like, well, how do you fix that? And I'm like, well, I just be vulnerable and ask for what it is I need, which is super hard. It's really scary. It's totally out of your comfort zone, but it's worth a shot. And so then they would go and try these things. And 4 to 6 weeks, they would come back and be like, oh my gosh, because of what you told me, my relationship shifted with my boss or my team or my kids, my parents, whatever, my spouse. And they started to speak life into me and say things like, have you ever thought about becoming a coach, writing a book, starting a podcast, being a public speaker? And in the back of my mind, I'm like, I have, but I didn't really have the confidence to do so. So thank you for speaking life into me. And at the same time, I really had to think, back to the clients are giving me their best advice for me and saying, oh, wait, what if, even though I don't have confidence in myself, what if I borrow their confidence in me? And what if they're right? What's the worst that can happen? I learn new skills and I remain being a hairstylist. What does it matter? And once I started down that route, and once I went to the Fearless Living Conversations workshop, everything shifted. And I knew I was destined for more. And that instead of the one-on-one, it was the one-to-many. And so everything has shifted and ebbed and flowed. And that's where I am today.
How amazing. When you were talking about your mom and how she changed, your dad changed, and you were able to also uplift your clients. I was thinking of the book, The Little Soul and the Sun, which is by Neil Donald Walsh. It's a children's book. Are you familiar with it?
No.
Well, Neil Donald Walsh also, he wrote Conversations with God. And I haven't read that one, but the children's book, I read it to my son, and it's really beautiful and powerful. And the idea behind it is that we're all kind of playing this game where we're pretending, doing different roles, and we'll forget. It's like somebody's got to be the villain in the game, in the story, and we forget. But when we forget, then everybody forgets. So we have to remember so that the other players in the game, the other little souls who are doing this dance with us, will also remember who they really are. Because the whole point of this is to experience being the light.
Yes.
Not just to learn lessons and all that, but to experience being the light. Experience different aspects of being the light. Being forgiving, being generous, being kind, being loving. And in order to be, for example, forgiving, you have to have somebody to forgive. But there was nobody to forgive because we were all beautiful and perfect. So somebody had to play the role of being the villain, and that meant forgetting who they were. Because how could you be, this angelic being, remembering who you are, and be a villain at the same time? So that you have somebody to forgive. So that's how it works. And then when you remember who you are, you inspire others to remember who they are. And if you forget who you are, then everybody else forgets too.
I love that. And speaking of forgiveness, when I was probably, I don't know, maybe 6, 7 years after this healing, I started on my healing journey, my mom was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so I immediately, when the diagnosis came, I was able to go to her. She lived, a ways away. I had to, drive. And so I went to her and I put my hand on her stomach where the cancer was. And I said, Mom, I forgive you. Please forgive me. Let's enjoy whatever time you have. And she said, yes, let's do that. And, the place, when you come from a place of service and forgiveness has already been the foundation, and love and compassion, the service is so different when I'm serving and taking care of my mom. It never once felt like an obligation. It felt like I was exactly where I am supposed to be. And it was a gift in every aspect of the word for me. Like, this was a gift that I got to give my mom every time I would visit her, which was every other weekend for about 16 months. They gave her 4 to 6 months and she lived 16. And, there were times where, she was sick the whole time. There was times where we would go on a road trip and I'm like, what do you want to see? And she's like, oh, there's a museum with everything made with matches. And there's like the White House and the Space Center and the Buckingham Palace is made with nothing but matches. I'm like, great, let's go. And so whatever, it's like a 3-hour drive in the middle of the country. So I was like, sure, let's go. And we just, had great conversations, and just in our energies, I just feel like really intertwined and spoke volumes to each other, and just being able to be filled with love and compassion.
Amazing. So do you believe in soul contracts, that you and your mother chose each other before incarnating, and that she was going to do what she did to kind of traumatize you in different ways, but also give you these little wisdom nuggets as you were growing up too, that inspired you or changed your perspective and so forth, that this was all kind of a setup, a divine setup?
Absolutely. Both of them, both my parents. Well, and my brother. I have my brother's passed too. And same thing, all of them. My grandma, yep, all my family. And it's interesting, when I got out of the abusive relationship, there was a book called Women Who Love Too Much, and that I read, that really was instrumental, changed my life. And it shows how when you're with someone like that, it's familiar. That's why statistics will tell you that people who have been in abusive relationship typically go either back to the same person or someone similar, because that's all they know. So I really started to ask myself this question that I ask myself again often, is what is it that I don't know that I need to know in order to move forward? And when you're looking from a place of curiosity, and I call it curious exploration, you really are able to just come up with really interesting things, like, oh, I didn't know how to love. I didn't know what love looks like. I didn't know what family love looked like. Okay, got it. And you see examples of it. And Stephan, your family is definitely an example of family love. So I loved seeing you guys all together at Podfest. So thank you for having your wife and your son there. But to just be able to notice that, rather than noticing like the drama filled couples in the world, is just huge. And you just to switch that mindset and that reframe was huge. So yeah, I totally believe in soul contracts, and I'm so glad I learned everything. I fully believe that when we learn a lesson, it becomes knowledge, and it's not until we share it that it's wisdom.
Yeah. I also believe that spiritual lessons and ideas, knowledge, wisdom that we acquire spill over, carry over into future lives as well. It's not lost. Like if you don't remember much at all of past lives, other than maybe from past life regression session or from maybe Akashic Records reading or something like that, then you're just getting these little tiny fragments. But you're not going to be able to retain that, oh, yeah, I was a marketing expert in that lifetime. And I happen to be one this time now, again, and I remember all this stuff. No, all that's gone. But the spiritual lessons, like I know, and I've always known in this life, to never curse anybody. I just knew. Even when I was agnostic for my first 42 years of life, I just never, ever cursed somebody. It's just, you carry this stuff through, and my this is my understanding.
Well, it's funny you mentioned past lives and generational. So I am now trained as a master practitioner in NLP and hypnosis and MER, which is a mental and emotional release. And we learn how to coach people through their past lives, through the past generations. And we talk to the unconscious and we say, preserve these learnings. And it's just fascinating when you look at it from the lens of, the soul contracts. It's like, oh, that's exactly what was happening. And now it's like, let's honor that by asking the unconscious to pull that up and be able to live with that wisdom today.
Yeah, really cool. I mean, I don't find a need to just dig up a bunch of dirt from my old, past lives or whatever. But I do feel like there is wisdom that I accumulated from all those experiences that is within me, that's accessible. Something you said earlier about being a bridge. It's, this feels to me like you have one foot in this world and one foot in the unseen world. And you're able to traverse those two worlds simultaneously and bring stuff down from the unseen to the seen, because not that many people yet can do that. So they're only seeing what you see is what you get. And you can access this stuff and you can bring it to them and help draw down that light. So that's how I interpret that message about you are a bridge that you got from the centaur, was it?
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. I'll take that.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about talking to God, because I loved that story that you shared of having a conversation with God and getting guided to that angel trinket, and how meaningful it was, and getting the interpretation of it. Because so many people, I find, and I was included in that, just would love to know what's the bigger picture here, but don't feel like they're getting any information. Like they're flying blind. I felt like I was flying blind. I had no idea. Like I'd bumped my toe on something and I'm like, what the heck? Like that was such a freak accident. Why did that happen? And crickets, nothing, because I'm not directing that question to God. I'm just being rhetorical. When I direct the question to God, I get answers, and not always. Sometimes I'm not supposed to get the answer, but when I get up in the morning, one of the things I do in my morning ritual is to ask God, what do I need to know or do today? That's similar to your question of what is it I need to know that I don't know. It makes a world of difference.
It really does. Probably 20 something years ago, I started journaling. As an adult, we'll put it that way. I had to do it in school and I hated it. I thought it was dumb, and now I do it all the time, right? But as an adult, I started journaling, and it was out of frustration of the abuse that I was enduring, the pain, physical pain that I was going through. I had just been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, and I refused to be on the cocktail of 3 medications that they wanted to put me on. It was painkillers, antidepressants, and sleeping pills. And I said, no, thank you. And I went to acupuncture and got acupuncture every week for a year. And in the process of that, I feel like there was so much, well, obviously chi, there was obviously energy that was moved. My crown chakra, I think, was cleared so that I was able to really receive messages. So one day I had this idea pop into my head out of the blue that I should start journaling. And I was like, oh, that sounds so stupid. Why would I do that? You know, and here comes the fear talk, right? I did that in school. I hated it. My hand hurt. Blah, that's awful. And so I just got out some notebook paper and I'm literally writing down all those things. This is stupid. I don't want to do this. My hand's going to hurt. I hated this in school. F you, English teacher, blah, 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 all the things. And then it was like, okay, well, what if I just let whatever thought comes up, I just do it. So literally, what I was doing was just capturing my thoughts. And in doing that, in that first time, all of a sudden, my memory shifted to a time when I was in probably 6th grade and I was getting up to go do a math problem or go write something on the board. And I remember, like, I can see it just plain as day. And, but I didn't know what was happening to me until I wrote that first journal entry. And as I'm writing it, I'm writing how I felt, that the teacher called my name and my heart started to race and I started to get sweaty palms and I started to get really nervous. In my mind, of course, that most young people, especially girls, have this body dysmorphia about themselves. So in my mind, I'm thinking my body is so wide that I'm not going to fit down the aisles of the classroom, and I'm going to knock books off the people's desks. I'm going to knock Kleenex boxes off their desk. And I'm going to, what if, not if, but what if I have to bend over and my pants rip and all of these things that were going through my mind as I'm walking to the chalkboard to write down whatever it was, whether it was writing an answer or a math problem or something on the board. And then the same thing then, not to mention to know the answer of that question that was on the board, right? And then having these same thought process and feelings and emotions, and I'm sweating profusely and all of that as I walk back to my seat, to my desk, and I sit down and as I'm writing this in this journal, I'm like, oh my God, this was a panic attack. No way. I had no idea I was experiencing those as a young kid, because then I would get home from school, and in our house, we had a saying that if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And so if it wasn't anything nice, as in my, little brain took it as positive, then don't talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Good news only.
Yeah. So I would get home, and instead of saying, hey, I had this weird thing that happened to me at school, they would be like, how was your day? Fine. And then it was, well, here's your snack. And it was normally, something my mom lovingly, because that was her way of showing love and care, was delicious chocolate chip cookies, right? Or something amazing that she baked from the oven, apple crisp, or, something, that was only 1,000 calories a piece type of thing, some sort of bar or goodie, right? And so I learned that then to express myself, I needed to hide those feelings and shove down those emotions, and with food. And then in my teenage years, I started doing that with alcohol. And then, and it was probably actually right after that 6th grade moment, I started doing it with alcohol, because by the time I was 15, I was drinking daily. And at 16, I got a DUI. And at 23, I quit drinking. 24, I quit drinking altogether. And I've been sober ever since. But, and then I went back to food for a while. But I remember, right again, in that first journal entry, writing how I felt so embarrassed to tell my mom about what happened, and not just my mom, like anybody around me. And so I didn't want to feel that embarrassment anymore. And so I would take whatever was closest to me to hide that embarrassment.
Wow. Thank you for your vulnerability. This is so valuable and important and beautiful to share this kind of real, raw experience and get this out there for others so that they, if they're experiencing something similar, can feel not alone, can feel like there's light at the other end of the tunnel.
Absolutely. So that began my journey of journaling. And within a few weeks, they no longer became journals. As a journal entry, it became a letter to God. And I started to ask him to help my boyfriend at the time, who was abusive, heal him, help him, take care of him, and at some point along the journal process, and I really believe that had I not been journaling and was able to look back, that this probably wouldn't have happened. But all of a sudden it hit me. And again, it was probably a download. It was probably God saying, really, why aren't you doing this? That all of a sudden it became very aware to me that I wasn't asking for me. I wasn't asking for God to heal me, or God, what do you want me to do? Or, take care of me. I was asking only for someone else. And if that person doesn't want that, then they're blocking it, right? They're blocking their own blessing. And so once I really started to shift the way I was journaling and started to go, okay, God, help me. And then again, it shifted again. Once I was out of that relationship, it was really a thank you letter to God every day. And thank you for getting me out of this. And thank you for this. And thank you for that. And as time started to go on, the conversation between God and I was no longer just on that pen and paper in the morning. It was an ongoing conversation in my head of, okay, God, who do you want? I'm at a network event and I'm standing there like, okay, God, who do you want me to meet? Who do you want me to connect with? And who do you want me to learn? What do you want me to learn? What's my takeaway? And I literally remember at this one particular event, I stood in the same place and I just turned. I was like on a pivot, like on one of those turntables. And I literally did, circles, and people just approached me and I met the most amazing people. And I was like, oh my God, like, I don't even know how I couldn't have planned this. So to have those type of experiences are just so profound to me. And then another one, several years later, I was at my first podcast conference, which was Podcast Movement in 2019 in Orlando. And I meet like 500 people, of course. And then the last day I meet this gentleman who said, well, tell me what you do for your coaching. So now at this point, I'm taking clients and stuff. And I said, oh, I transform trauma into treasure. And because that's what I did with my own life. And he said, have you considered working with veterans? And I said, well, that's funny you ask. I meet them everywhere I go. Literally everywhere I go. One of the things at networking events is more than likely there would be a veteran in the mix that I would meet. And he's like, well, I'm a veteran and I know that this would help you. And so, or help them, what you do. And he worked for Bunker Labs, which is a space for veteran-owned businesses to go from idea to invoice. And I love business anyway. So I was like, well, what is that? And so I started helping at the local community there in Kansas City with their Bunker Labs until 2020 happened and, everything shifted to online. But the fascinating part is just how I said, okay, God, literally went through the rest of the conference literally looking up through the rest of the conference, which was only just a few hours going, okay, God, really? Are you trying to tell me you want me to work with veterans? Is that what you're doing? And as soon as I'm like, well, okay, I'm here. What's next? And within a month, I was telling you earlier, I lived part-time in DC. Within a month, out of a series of conversations, I found myself on Capitol Hill in a congresswoman's office advocating for what is the government doing, helping the military find their purpose before they get out of the military, going back to civilian life. What tools and skills are they equipping them with? And the answer is they're not. So talking to God has given me fantastic direction, and now that's why I live in Florida.
Amazing. When you were talking about the journaling, I could totally relate that I never had any desire to journal. I knew I was supposed to, that was like a thing. Like, this is highly productive leaders do this. They journal. And I just I couldn't bring myself to do it. And now I do it almost invariably every day as part of my morning ritual. And my journal, I call the God journal, or my God journal. And that's because I write it to God and I'm thanking him for everything. And I'm thanking him. The most important aspect of the God journal for me, from a kind of a utilitarian perspective, is the messages. Because now I can go back. This is all fodder for potential, keynote presentations or whatever, or for material for books and podcast episodes and YouTube videos and so forth. All these beautiful messages that I receive, like downloads and synchronicities, angel numbers, and then I unpack what that means by looking it up in whatever book that I'm guided to, or doing a Google search. All of that stuff is recorded. I also, of course, thank God for the blessings, the beautiful stuff that's happening in my life, and also the challenges, because these are disguised blessings. And I'll look back at something that was looked like a total, SHIT show at the time, and see it as a beautiful opening or unfolding of something that was an important up-leveling in my life, in my spirituality, and my development. So I find that very, very important, and gives me a lot of, it anchors me, and I can't imagine not doing it anymore. Like, that's part of who I am now. I'm somebody who journals, and I don't just journal for myself. I journal for God, or to God, and for him. And, as part of being a servant, and being a delivery agent for his miracles. This is an essential aspect of how I show up in the world.
Agreed. I mean, that's how I look at it too. I feel like for me, it's my way of paying it forward and paying it back to God for removing me from the abusive relationship. Yeah. And all the healing that has happened. It's like, oh, this is how I can pay you back, is by working through me, because you worked in me.
Yeah. Do you see that your ex and you had a soul contract where you guys decided, like, you're going to be the villain in this lifetime, and okay, I will do that because I love you that much. I will do that for you. And that's kind of the premise of it. And from that book, The Little Soul in the Sun, like, I love you that much that I will play the villain, but just don't forget who I really am, because I will forget.
Absolutely. And our energies have moved to forgiveness, moved to that gratitude. Absolutely. Many times over. He was in a car accident. He was in a coma. And so to just sit with someone, knowing that I was, walking away, but to be able to sit with him in the hospital, and him stare at this point, his eyes were open, and him stare at me blankly for hours, and our energies and our souls to just go, it has done. It was really powerful for me. And I think it was for him too, on a soul conscious, I think, not, in his body that he was with for the rest of his days. But yeah, it was, I saw it. I felt it. Like, okay, you understand why this is the way it is. And even though you might not understand what I'm saying right now, but you understand. And I didn't even have to say anything. I just sat there, and it was just, you could just feel it.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a telepathic communication going on. Did he wake up from the coma?
So in the first week, his eyes opened, and that's quote unquote waking up. And then he had brain damage, and then they moved him from to a long-term care facility, and then they moved him to a nursing home. And the last time I saw him, he was in the nursing home, and that's all that he had progressed, was that he had his eyes were open. He had a feeding tube and a trachea at that time. And he then lived 14 more years in a nursing home in a wheelchair. He was able to use his right side of the body, but not his left. And he had brain bleeds. So when someone has a brain bleed, they continue to have mini strokes. And so that's what it was mimicking, was a stroke. And I told him goodbye the only time I saw him in the nursing home. And he told me goodbye. So.
Wow. Oh, thank you for sharing all that. That's profound, beautiful. And yeah, it seems to me from an outsider perspective that the healing there is complete. But that's for you to determine. It's just my outside perspective.
Absolutely. Well, I will say forgiveness. Back to journaling, if I may share about forgiveness and journaling. One of the gifts that I received one day as I was driving to work was I was listening to Christian radio, and it was, I don't have no idea what pastor came on and was giving the message of anger. And he said, do you have a list of people you're angry with? And I went, oh my God, yeah, I need a list. That's exactly what I need. At this time in my life, I was still with him. But I had realized, I became very aware that I was feeling angry. And it was because I was journaling, and I was like, okay, what is it that I'm feeling today? Oh, I'm angry. Wow. Have I ever actually felt what it feels like to be angry? Or was I so used to stuffing something down, that anger down, right? Using something to stuff it down. And I thought, wow, this is a weird feeling. Okay. So then I'm in the salon. I go to do my clients, and they're like, how are you? How are you? And they're always like, oh, I'm great. And they're like, how are you? And I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm realizing I'm angry. How do you deal with anger? And they're like, well, first of all, Shay, are you going to be okay? Because you have a sharp instrument towards my head. Are you going to be okay to cut my hair? And I'm like, oh, of course, I'll be fine. You'll be fine. I am fine. I just have never really, I've noticed that I've never really felt what anger feels like. So how do you deal with anger when it shows up for you? And most of my clients were women. And I will tell you that most of them had no idea how to deal with anger, nor how to feel it, nor did something else to avoid it. They're like, oh, well, I have a glass of wine at the end of the day. Okay, that's one way. And I don't want to do that. So I'm a recovered alcoholic at this point. I'm like, no, and I'm good. I don't need to do that. So how do I need to navigate this? And there wasn't really any information at the time out there. So here I am driving to work one day, and this pastor comes on, do you have a list? And I went, oh my God, that's exactly what I need. I need a list. So I grabbed a fast food napkin, and, I unfold it 12 times, however much it's folded into a compact little thing. And I grab a pen from my console, and I'm literally going, oh, I'm mad at this person. I'm mad at this person. I just started making a list of people, and I get to work, and I'm like, oh my gosh, the front and the back is filled with all these people's names that I'm upset about. And I realized it wasn't just a full on major thing that happened. It was just a grudge that I had been holding onto for whatever reason. And I thought, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do exactly with this, but I'm going to do something at some point. And so I hung on to that list. And sometime later, I decided I was going to take the day and get all my favorite junk food and soda and everything I wanted. And I said, I'm just going to journal it out. And so each person, I would, journal of, this is how I feel. This is exactly what I want to tell you, cuss words and all. And then I would say, I forgive you. Do you forgive me? And then, God, do you forgive me? And then go to the next person. And, bringing up all of these memories of all of this grudges with all these people. After I spent the entire day doing this, it was gone. And the heaviness of my shoulders weighing me down had dissipated. And what a freeing feeling that was, to be able to go, wow, this is forgiveness. Okay, got it. And I did nothing with that. I didn't send it to them. I didn't call them up and be like, hey, I'm so sorry. I was mad at you, even though you didn't know it all these years. There was a couple of people that I felt that I needed to reach out to and say, hey, I'm really sorry. I know I was a jerk. I was a bully. I was a bully in school. I'm sorry. And I was going through my own crap, and I took it out on you, and I'm sorry for that. And some of them responded, some of them didn't. Some responded, was like, oh, it's no big deal. Some of them responded, or some of them didn't respond, but they saw the message, and I just went, it is what it is. So, but I felt cleaner, felt like I needed to do that to be complete.
It's a great exercise. It's a great share. Wow. Love it. Well, this is a great way to end this episode too, because now our listener hopefully is inspired to do that exercise themselves. Good stuff. So if you wanted to, share one last wisdom nugget or something to close out the episode, what would that be?
When people first of all, let me just say, I have to close my eyes and get really quiet and ask, God, what do you want me to share in this moment? Because I don't ever want to have a canned answer. And I feel like every audience is different. And I want to make sure that I'm the vessel that he works through in order to give the right one. And so what I just got, the message I just got, what I just heard was to say, be willing to say what you mean and mean what you say, and be willing to ask for support, and be willing to ask for what it is you actually need.
Mean what you say and say what you mean. That's similar to one of my affirmations and how it sounds, and that's I'm a man who does what he says he's going to do.
Yes. Love that. So
awesome. And if our listener or viewer wants to work with you or learn from you, I don't know if you take on individual coaching clients or not, or if it's just group programs, but if they want to work with you or learn from you, where do they go?
Absolutely. You can go to my website at shaysparks.com, and you can also find me on all social media. Shay Sparks on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and I believe Instagram is the Shay Sparks. And you can find my podcast that is now going to be called The Shay Sparks Show by the time this episode is aired. And you can find me on all the platforms for that, as well as YouTube. So thank you for having me, Stephan. This was beautiful, beautiful conversation.
Yes, for sure. Thank you. And thank you, listener. I mean, you're a special person to listen all the way to the end of an episode like this. You're open-minded, you're conscious, and you want to be better. And, that's my hat's off to you for that. So we'll catch you on the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.